Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Hyperabyssic Ontology, Part 10. Tiphareth and Self-Consciousness. The mediation of the dual instinctual drives, represented by the Hesed-Geburah axis, devolves upon and gives rise to the sixth Sephirah Tiphareth, located in the central position on the tree of life, and where the unconscious structures of the psyche represented above and behind its level on the tree now finally consciously manifest. Tiphareth corresponds to the sun, whose gravitational influence holds its vast orbital system in dynamic stability. Its psychological function is self-consciousness, or the organization of conscious experience in terms of the I. Yet what is this I, whose reference seems so natural and obvious to our common sense? For it turns out that few concepts are more ambiguous and fraught with philosophical subtlety than self-identity. Traditional metaphysics presumes that the unity of the self is an empirically given natural category. David Hume undermined this assumption in his Treatise of Human Nature when he pointed out that when we investigate our experience of the self through introspection, we never encounter an I, only diverse thoughts that in and of themselves display no necessary substantial unity with each other. So where does this idea come from if it is not part of our immediate mental experience? In the Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant argues that, quote, I am conscious of the self as identical in respect of the manifold of representations that are given to me in an intuition, because I call them one and all my representations, and so apprehend them as constituting one intuition, unquote. This function of psychological unification, whereby, quote, it must be possible for the I think to accompany all my representations, unquote, and which Kant calls the synthetic unity of apperception, is, he asserts, the highest principle in the whole sphere of human knowledge. Furthermore, he avoids entanglement with Hume's skepticism when he writes that this unification, quote, does not, however, lie in the objects and cannot be borrowed from them, and so through perception first take it up into the understanding. On the contrary, it is nothing but the faculty of combining a priori and of bringing the manifold of given representations under the unity of apperception, unquote. The self or I is a transcendental category built into the basic structure of the hermeneutical horizon of being, such that our empirical experience within that horizon has already been organized in terms of a unified sense of self prior to any actual experience. Yet, where does this transcendental structure that unifies the experience of subjectivity derive from? Kant's officially agnostic methodology deliberately does not answer this question, leaving open the possibility for religious faith that God is the origin of the transcendental horizon of being. Following the lead of Schopenhauer and other atheist critics and also appreciators of Kant's philosophy, I would argue that Lacan's reading of the Freudian psychoanalytic tradition provides one of the best anthropological accounts of the origin of the transcendental category of the I. For if God is not the answer to the question of being, then we must look to human beings and their socially productive activity for the solution. From a Lacanian Freudian perspective, private subjectivity, the experience of being an I, derives from Oedipal socialization and is neither biologically natural nor possible for individuals to have apart from a history of involvement with society. Hegel already understood this when he wrote in the Phenomenology that self-consciousness necessarily evolves out of the social recognition that persons in society reciprocally share with each other. Freud's further contribution was to describe how patriarchal roles within the family shape the development of the psyche, a process he dubbed the Oedipal complex. Lacan further refined this insight by exploring the way social roles are a product of cultural language usages, what he called the symbolic order, and how these shape, facilitate, and also sabotage socialization, imprinting the psyche with a template, the imaginary, that establishes and structures the transcendental horizon of the experience of psychological interiority entailed in being an I. Finally, he theorized how the necessarily incomplete and open-ended quality of Oedipal socialization, the real, both traumatizes subjects and is also the basis for their ontological freedom. In the context of thelemic theurgy, Tiphareth's most significant correspondence is to the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel that discloses the true will to self-conscious comprehension and actualizes the subject's freedom to fulfill their deepest potential for authentic being in the world. However, I would challenge from a Lacanian point of view the traditional organic hierarchical concept of Tiphareth as the point of harmony on the tree, where structural oppositions are reconciled and balanced. On the face of it, this seems like an obvious interpretation of the Sephira's title, Tiphareth, typically translated beauty. However, for Harold Bloom's catastrophe theory of creativity, set forth in his work Agon and elsewhere, aesthetic beauty is instead conceived as the expression of creative jouissance whose excessive quality resists and subverts reconciliation with what is immediately ideologically appropriate. Like the sun's gravity, the true will distorts and curves the fabric of psychic space, causing the surrounding psychic functions to fall into its orbit. The origin of the solar system was an era of planetary collisions, because there was no foreordained pattern for their orbits, contra Isaac Newton's theistic system of the world, which incorrectly assumed that the solar system was supernaturally created in its present form, at the same time as the Garden of Eden is narrated in the book of Genesis. The Kant-Laplace nebular hypothesis eventually replaced Newton's theory with a more correct model of the solar system's gradual development into its current state of dynamic equilibrium. This occurred only after the various primordial collisions had sorted themselves out, and the pitted and cratered debris that remained assumed the relative stability of a fully formed planetary system. Likewise, self-consciousness emerges in and through the trauma of Oedipal socialization, positively appropriating the chaos of its circumstances to achieve creative growth. The word of sin is restriction, declares the Book of the Law, chapter 1, verse 41. The transparency of desire, or Geburah, to concern, or Hesed, potentially liberates the sense of self-identity, of Tiphareth, from its normal state of absorption in the average and alienated social possibilities offered by contemporary consumer commodity culture. Subjectivity breaks out of the static network of its interpolation by the symbolic order into a new paradigm of self-directed and open-ended mutation of identity. As such, the true will that results from this dynamic cannot be described in terms of the unity of opposites or any formula of balanced spiritual reconciliation. The true will stands not for the unification of heaven and earth, but for a Luciferic revolution, overthrowing heaven so there can be a new earth, liberated from domination by any heavenly hierarchical order. The Rosicrucian emblem, conjoining the crucifix and a red rose, is especially associated with Tiphareth in the Golden Dawn system of initiation, whose Rosicrucian-themed degree of Adeptus Minor is associated with this Sephira. In his visionary account of the 22nd ether of the Enochian Plains, received on the Algerian desert on the afternoon of November 28, 1909, Aleister Crowley develops the symbolism of the rose and cross in a manner germane to the present discussion. He recites, quote, "My arms were out in the form of a cross, and that cross was extended, blazing with light into infinity. I myself am the minutest point in it. This is the birth of form." Unquote. In his explanatory notes to the vision, Crowley writes, "Form is the conception of the self in extension." The vision continues, quote, "I am encircled by an immense sphere of many-colored bands. It seems it is the sphere of the Sephiroth projected in the three dimensions. This is the birth of death." Unquote. To which his comment adds, "Death is the conception of the self extended, not into the positive balanced cross, but into the negative circle or sphere, nuit. Then, now in the center within me is a glowing sun. This is the birth of hell. He adds, hell is the secret center of the self. One perceives one's star as one's true self. Unquote. I interpret the cross as standing for libidinal desire, whose phallic extension of concern is the basis for experience, the form of self-consciousness, and upon which that self-identity is crucified, castrated, appearing as the minutest point within the field of illuminated intelligibility of the clearing of being. This extension of the subject into the light of the social life world is in fact founded on a negative absence. The illumination of the phallic gaze is sustained by the darkness of the death drive. Wittgenstein describes the vanishing point of the self in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus as follows, quote, the thinking presenting subject, there is no such thing. The subject does not belong to the world, but is a limit of the world. Where in the world is a metaphysical subject to be noted? You say that this case is altogether like that of the eye and the field of sight, but you do not really see the eye, and from nothing in the field of sight can it be concluded that it is seen from an eye. Here we see that solipsism, strictly carried out, coincides with pure realism. The eye in solipsism shrinks to an extensionless point, and there remains the reality coordinated with it, unquote. Wittgenstein's counterposing of the extensionless point of conscious awareness and the reality coordinated with it bears comparison with the symbolism of Hadith and Nuit as deployed in Crowley's exegesis of the Rosy Cross. Meanwhile, the death of the self resulting from its extension into the negative circle or sphere of Nuit stands for the asymmetry of the dual unconscious instincts in favor of the excessive insistence of the creative death drive. Crowley writes, any will but that to give up the self to the beloved is black magic. And what is his definition of black magic? He writes, the single supreme ritual is the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. It is the raising of the complete man in a vertical straight line. Any deviation from this line tends to become black magic. Any other operation is black magic. In the true operation, the exaltation is equilibrated by an expansion in the other three arms of the cross. Hence, the angel immediately gives the adept power over the four great princes and their servitors. Unquote. The magical ascent in a vertical straight line up the tree of life erases the fixed boundaries of the socially interpolated Oedipal sense of self-identity. Through a therapeutic inversion onto the imaginary, the nothingness of the self is disclosed. This is the birth of hell and of the release of the creative drive from the pre-assumed superego limits imposed by the self's inscription by the symbolic order. The theurgist power is therefore amplified over the daimonic order, which is subsumed under the guidance of the true will. I would add that all hell breaks loose at this juncture. The creative permutations of the death drive undermine the harmony and balance of traditional organic hierarchical norms. Perilous and thrilling adventures await those who dispel the illusion called the world. Love is the law, love under will.